Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Ukraine and is expected to meet with President Zelensky in the coming hours. Now, this comes weeks after Modi traveled to Moscow for talks with President Vladimir Putin. During that visit, Russia launched several assaults on Ukrainian cities, including a deadly strike on a children's hospital. All right, Mark Stewart joins me now. So, Mark, take us through what we're expecting from this historic visit.
Indeed, Kim, for the moment, we are hearing a lot of statesman-like speech. For example, leading up to this visit, that's kind of the tone that we've been getting from New Delhi. Just yesterday, when the Prime Minister was in Poland, he gave a speech in Warsaw talking about diplomacy, about dialogue, the need for peace in the region. But this is, in many ways, a very lofty call because of some complicating factors. For example, India has called for a ceasefire, but it has not condemned the Russian aggression in Ukraine. India has stayed away from any kind of resolutions dealing with Ukraine in the United Nations. And then, as you alluded to, we had this meeting, this picture, if you will, of President Vladimir Putin and the Prime Minister Modi essentially embracing each other during that visit to Russia. Now, there are some geopolitical reasons why India and Russia are so cozy. The Kremlin helps provide India with defense equipment. India buys a lot of crude oil from Russia. But these are issues that are going to have to be reconciled during this historic meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And this is a relationship that actually has been decades, intact. This is a significant visit by the Indian Prime Minister. As far as what New Delhi is expecting, we are hearing the fact that all issues really are going to be on the table. This could relate to infrastructure, this could relate to economy, and of course, bilateral relations. But as we have seen just from these optics, from this visit to Russia by the Indian Prime Minister, things are going to be tricky. But this relationship with Ukraine is one that both sides do want to maintain. First of all, there's a lot of trade that takes place. But even if we look at some other issues, from the business standpoint, from an educational and scientific standpoint, Ukraine serves as the backdrop for training of a lot of Indian doctors. So for all of those reasons, we are expecting this to be a thoughtful and perhaps fruitful conversation. But let's remember, Kim, this came at the invitation of Volodymyr Zelensky, of President Zelensky. So he obviously has some issues on his mind and is going to likely want to take the lead. Again, the Prime Minister now on the ground in Ukraine.
All right, we'll be following that with interest. Mark Stewart in Beijing. Thanks so much. Russia is pointing a finger at Ukraine for the sinking of a civilian vessel carrying fuel tanks at a port near Crimea. It says the ferry caught fire and went under after a Ukrainian attack at the port of Kavkaz on Thursday. Russian officials say there are no confirmed casualties so far. Ukraine isn't commenting. Meanwhile, Russia is claiming more progress near the Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, northwest of Avdiivka. Moscow says it captured a village about 25 kilometers southeast of the city, which Ukraine hasn't confirmed yet. Kyiv says from a different direction, Russian troops are about 10 kilometers from Pokrovsk and approaching faster than expected. I want to bring in Salma Abdelaziz from London. So Salma, take us through the latest from the front lines in Russia and Ukraine.
Absolutely. Let's start with the ferry that you mentioned, this ferry that was downed in the Black Sea on the port of Kavkaz. This is extremely important for Russia because it is one of its outlets on the Black Sea that does not only just export goods, but it also imports fuel to Crimea. And Ukraine says that that's exactly what that ferry was doing. They have admitted responsibility for an attack on that ferry that saw that huge explosion that you see in that social media video there, or rather that huge fire that you see in that social media video there. The ferry did sink with some 30 tanks of fuel on board, according to Russian officials, who again are pointing the finger at Ukraine. And yet again, this is a reminder to Moscow's forces at just how vulnerable they are, that Ukraine can continue to strike those supply lines all along those Russian areas, those Russian assets, including, of course, inside Russian territory in Kursk, where Ukrainian forces are continuing that surprise assault that they launched 2 weeks ago. But since that time, Russia has been able to redeploy, rearm, reconfigure, and they are putting up stiff resistance now against those Ukrainian forces who say that Russian troops are just not surrendering in the same manner that they were before. But I think for Ukrainian forces, the major diversion, the major concern, the major pull right now is in eastern Ukraine. You mentioned that, of course, where Russian troops are advancing more quickly than expected, especially on the city of Pokrovsk, which right now is just very close to those front lines. Local officials are pleading with families to get out now. They've given them a 2-week deadline, and already record numbers of people are fleeing that city. But there are reports as well from local officials that parents are hiding their children to try to avoid these mandatory evacuations. So true scenes of distress playing out in eastern Ukraine, while Ukrainian forces very far from that front line are trying to push on the Russian war machine into Russian territory in Kursk. Kim.
All right, appreciate that update. Salma Abdulaziz in London. Thanks so much. The chief of the UN nuclear watchdog will head to Russia next week. The agency says Rafael Grossi will assess the situation at the Kursk nuclear plant, where Russia claims the wreckage of a drone that was shot down fell on Thursday. CNN can't independently confirm that claim. Ukraine has been conducting its cross-border offensive in the region, but its forces aren't in the vicinity of the plant.